Let's turn now to Commodity in Chief, where we focus on one executive in the commodity world. And today, it's Wally Kandel, founder of Shale Crescent USA. First, let's take a closer look at the company. The number, $188 billion, the amount of money poured into the chemical industry in the U.S. Gulf Coast since the shale gas revolution started. Now, Appalachia wants a piece of the action. Here's how it works. A petrochem plant takes wet gas like ethane, takes it apart, and puts it back together as ethylene. Then that gas is transformed into polyethylene, which makes plastic. The pitch? The Shale Crescent. It's the home of wet gas from the Utica and Marcellus, and the region should supply 37% of the U.S. natural gas production by 2040. Input costs are cheaper, and 2/3 of U.S. demand is local. So far, only Shell is biting. Other companies like Exxon and Dow are sticking with the U.S. Gulf Coast. It's got exportability, transportation, and storage. The U.S. Gulf Coast has wooed more than 70% of the capital spend. What can the Shale Crescent do? Well, I recently caught up with Wally Kandel, founder of Shale Crescent USA.
The region of Shale Crescent USA is really along the Ohio River on the borders of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. And the advantages is if you go back to 2010, the amount of natural gas that was being produced in this region was about 3%. Today it's 30%, and if we look out at 2040, it's 37%. A lot of that gas has natural gas liquids with it, which is the feedstock that's needed for petrochemical industry.
Why Utica Marcellus trumps Haynesville and, say, Permian-associated gas for Shale Crescent?
Well, I think all of those are going to be important things for the growth of the petrochemical industry in the U.S. But the location of the markets and the proximity to the natural gas is really a big piece here. In Shale Crescent USA, you have the most abundant natural gas, the cheapest natural gas in the developed world. You have a very plentiful water supply from the Ohio River, and you have, within a day's drive, 70% of the market. So if you're looking at an polyethylene plant, the people that consume the polyethylene pellets, 70% of those in North America are located very close to Shale Crescent USA. So you basically save the transportation of the gas from the Marcellus and Utica down to the Gulf Coast and the transportation cost of the pellets to bring it back.
If you wind up having lower input costs, are you also making less for the products that you sell?
Well, with lower input costs, the pricing is basically a regionalized pricing. So you can deliver the polyethylene price, or the polyethylene, 23% lower if you're producing it in Shale Crescent USA. That gives the opportunity for the polyethylene producers, one, to take a big piece of that, but also to provide some savings for the converters who are taking those pellets and making them into products.
So companies like Dow and Exxon have really stuck to the U.S. Gulf Coast, in part because they say transportation, truck or rail, it's also easy to get their product out in terms of exporting and their storage. What do you make of that?
Okay, so first off, for the last 75 years, the right place to put a petrochemical plant in North America was on the Gulf Coast. But with the change in where all the energy is coming, that situation has changed. So if companies have big assets that are already located on the Gulf Coast, the savings is probably not enough to entice them to build another facility. But if I'm a foreign company wanting to play, so to speak, in the North American petrochemical market, and you're looking over here, I mean, North America has the cheapest energy in the world right now, and when you look inside of North America, Shale Crescent USA is the best place to invest. So I think those are the most likely companies. You know, we see Shell that is invested in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. PTT is hopefully close to announcing that they will be building an polyethylene plant in Belmont County in Ohio. And based on the study, there's room for 3 or 4 more.
So how much does it cost to build a plant?
Well, the estimates for the plants that are going in right now are somewhere between $3 and $6 billion. I know that's a big range, but it really depends on the size of the plant that they build.
Over time, how much can a plant return in the Shale Crescent versus the U.S. Gulf Coast?
Well, when we looked at the economics of building the same facility, we chose a $3 billion facility that could be built in Shale Crescent USA and on the Gulf Coast. And the net present value is 4 times higher in Shale Crescent USA because of the savings in the feedstock and the transportation savings.
Wally also told me he's convinced that the distance from the Permian and the U.S. Gulf Coast will be the key factor in luring those petrochem plants to Appalachia.